This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, I will be speaking with Lama Ole Nydahl about his life, the world, and his place in it, and the conversation will begin in a moment. I'm interviewing Lama Ole Nydahl. He is the founder of the Diamond Way of Buddhism, and he has been on the scene for probably 40 or more years teaching his views of life, and I'm glad to be interviewing him. For people who don't know you, Lama, could you just take a minute or two and give a little bit of background about where you came from and how you got into Buddhism, how you first encountered it?
Well, generally, I'm a child of my generation. I grew up during the ending of the Second World War, where my parents were in resistance, protecting Jews and taking them over to Sweden, which was neutral at the time, and so on. And I was very lucky. My parents were exceedingly kind and also very bright. They wrote about 50 books, to bring them out. After the war, they also started giving German books again, so people could talk together and understand each other again, and Europe could start a new round. So I grew up, say I was always a very tough boy. I was always climbing the highest tree, and fighting one boy at a time was usually not enough, so I'd like a couple. And so on. So I was very normal, very fresh, very Danish, and had the best parents in the world. And later on, I also got a wonderful brother. I mean, just a better human being than I am. I'm really a fantastic man. I'm good to go out with and everything. So I met my wife, Hannah. I met her already when she was 3 years old, and I was about 6 or 7. And so on, and we fell in love, but then they built a skyscraper near the place, another skyscraper, just a high-rise, where her parents were living, and they didn't want to live next to a big piece of concrete, so they went further north in Denmark to a very beautiful place. And there I met her again when I came out of the army. I met her at the place where we were doing the meditations at that time, and so on. Cannibal, it was called. There was a student's eating place. Cannibal was because they said from time to time somebody would be missing around there, and then there would always be lots of meat, extra much meat, in the food served, right, and so on. Of course, a joke, but anyway. So I met her there, and we were just swept off our feet again. It was like we had waited for that. But we were people of our generation, and we had been smoking pot for a while, we went on from there to some very rewarding, we thought at the time, LSD trips and stuff like that, just where we actually only had very good, very, very fantastic experiences. We're climbing the old churches in Copenhagen and so on. And after that, we actually met that which became the thing to do in this life. We met some of the old great lamas from the Cosmoetica lineage, right? And there are many lineages in Tibetan Buddhism for different things, but Cosmoetica is for those who want to meditate, who want to work with their minds and get sort of really lasting results. I mean, things you can feel afterwards. You can feel if they are in the room and so on. It is massive stuff, it's very powerful. So we stayed there, we went out, we stayed first half a year in Nepal, came back again, and then we went out again and stayed 3 years, I think, 4 years, we stayed again, and with the Karmapa, the first incarnate Lama of Tibet, who took us as his direct students, who said, we probably thought they're crazy enough, I can use them for anything, so they'll do anything I say, so let's get him into the role, right? And then some wonderful years came with inviting him, inviting Kalu Rinpoche, another teacher which was there, also a great old yogi, and driving them through Europe and meeting them in America and other places and so on. And it was heaven, it was wonderful. Then, nothing is impermanent, and Tibetans have very bad eating habits and they don't get very old, right? So first we lost Karl Rinpoche, which was really a pity because he had everything. Then Lopan Setu Rinpoche, another one, and half Bhutanese, who was our very first contact. Then Sherab Gyaltsen Rinpoche. I mean, many different teachers came and went, and so on, and a few are still there today helping. Sherab Gyaltsen Rinpoche is very important there. But except for that, we lived in a time where the old people, the old lamas, due to not very good food, not much knowledge about nourishment and stuff like that, they actually died quite a lot earlier than they should have died. But every time we started, Hannah and I got together and said, what did they give us? What did we learn from it? What must now be preserved? What can we not be sure if anybody has it or not, right? And then people started coming. They were interested in it. I was asked to give power, which is where you send your mind from the top of your head. You send the energy out from the opening about 8 fingers behind the original hairline on the top back of the head. And it's not a game, you have a little hole there, and there's some blood, and you can feel it and stuff like that. It's really there. And some people experience leaving their bodies and going to states of great bliss, and it's a fantastic thing. It's what power means, sending out. And then, after a while, about a year ago, then I think after I had given that hold to maybe a million people around the world, like, no, 100,000, yeah, 100,000, sorry. Tomek, my friend, is sitting across from here, and he always said, if I put too many zeros, he'd lose the side. So 100,000 people I gave that, and it's very good because you lose your fear of death, you lose a lot of other things, that weigh people down, and it's just a good thing. You also become fearless, what you could see recently at the big earthquakes in Nepal, where we went out to give them money and help and so on. And several of us stayed in a big high house, the only house that was standing in that part of Kathmandu, and it was swinging all night, but we stayed there all night because we thought it was exciting, right? Mm. So this kind of thing, the thing with Kathmandu sort of brings us up to time, right? Brings us up to here and now.
Well, let me ask you about your parents, since you had mentioned them, because you would have, from looking you up, you would have been about 4, just turning 4 when the war in Europe was winding down. Do you have any direct memories of the occupation by Nazi Germany?
And very, very good. I remember we had a streetcar outside, and my mother was taking me along. My brother had just been born, right? And every time I saw a gray uniform, I'd scream something, and she would very quickly have to get me off the tram before anything happened. And I remember walking around and finding, what are they called, cartridges, from places where they had been shooting. And my parents were they picked up the BBC messages about where the English bombers, the airplanes, would leave the different things for the Danish resistance. And they would go out at night and they would get the things, they would put them back in again, and they were heroes, they were great, And after the war, they said, okay, it's over, the Germans now we have to talk to the Germans, right? And so on, and get to know them and work with them and so on. And then they made, I think, 50 books, 50 teaching books, how for Danish people to learn German, right? Mm. And they went very well, so there was no anger in their minds and so on, but they were just the kind of people they were.
What impelled them? Were they religious? Were they Lutherans or Catholics? What impelled them in their service to resist and to help, as you said, Jews and others flee to Sweden?
The humanists wanted to help, and I think also they were aware that how great is the amount of information that the Jews have put into the world, right? I mean, inventors and all kinds of other things. It seems they have half of the Nobel Prizes, and it's about 14 billion people, right? So it was like they were very interested in that, and they were very glad they could save a lot of these people over to Sweden, which was selling ball bearings to both English and German. So none of them wanted to blow them up or destroy them or anything like that.
What drew you specifically to Buddhism initially from as a young man? Because from what I've read, you were already in your mid to late 20s when you encountered it.
Actually, we didn't hear very much, you know. Today, young people, you know, I mean, if I had heard today, I would have come in via sporty things, right? I mean, I was boxing for 4 years. I did all kinds of other things, right, that were very exciting, and my brother the same thing, and so on. So it was like you could say that if I had known about, you know, I would have come via the sporty angle and the jumping in the air and kicking people and stuff like that, probably, right? But here, you know, it was just that I heard that how they had been treated, you know, and I knew how right they were. I was just very glad about that, and I wanted to support that, and so did my wife, and my family, and so on.
Well, let me ask you, here in the West, we often get misconceptions because the three dominant religions in the West are the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And oftentimes, I know when I met people who who were born in the West who somehow convert to Buddhism or some of the other Eastern religions, they always talk about sort of the schism of being versus becoming, that the Eastern faiths or religions or philosophies have the idea of a human being as just being, whereas in the West it's always becoming, moving on to something. Is that a misconception that you have found that a lot of people have?
It's been you look at people and you can get it. They are sweet, they are probably Hindu, they are worried about their sins or not sins, they are probably Christians, right? And they think that highest joy is highest meaning and highest truth, you know, and they're probably Buddhist, right? Something like that.
And what the I don't know much of.
Especially diamond.
Yeah.
There are other parts of the yellow robes are different. They avoid pain, right? The second ones do it intellectually, but diamond way, you know, we do it through experience, through all kinds of things.
Well, that was my next question. You are, I don't know if it originated with you, but did you originate your Diamond Way version of Buddhism? And how is that different from, say, the more traditional sort?
It's the same thing. It's just Westerners have a very good training from school. They are capable of thinking abstractly better than most people in Asia. And so you can just give them teachings earlier. You cannot hit so much some of the belief buttons, and my father did buttons, so I should also do that, something like that. But you can give this confidence which comes into people when they say he's got two legs, two arms like me, he's going through life, but he's a happy man, you know, and nothing, I've never seen him on his knees, you know, and I've always seen him happy and with more energy. And that's also what I would say for my many, many students around the world. Like, we have about 700 centers, you know, in different places. We go around the world twice every year, you know, we're very busy people. And I would say that, you know, they come because the hat fits. They have fun, you know, they like that. They get experience in meditation, strong experiences, strong health, and so on. And things happen, you know. I just have the picture of my wife here in front of me. And I just tell you, she did something, you know, which even the Tibetan yogis, you know, they just, you know, their ears move up and down, right? You can't really explain it, right? But when she died, you know, she died in my arms and with a group of our friends in Copenhagen, in the upper center of the upper room of our center, Diamond Way Center. And and there were three doctors there, you know, she was clinically dead 16 times. 16 times she was clinically dead. And then you could say, and then you could see her fighting through and said, I will be with them. I want to be with them. I want to be useful. I want to do things for them and so on. It was very strong. You know, it was just very powerful, you know. And then after a while, the system came up 16 times. I can tell you, a good yogi, if he's back 3 times, you know, that's already good.
Yeah.
16 times. I mean, the lady, you know, she went all through Asia working for the Tibetans, you know. teaching them, starting their meditations and so on. She was a massive lady. She was the best, I tell you. And it actually goes straight to my eyes, right? And I get a little wet at the eyes and so on. So, you know, I just want to say, you know, she was another dimension. She really was.
You just said earlier when I asked you about the Diamond Way uh, version of Buddhism that you thought that Asians or Asian cultures thought in less abstract ways. Could you give me an example of what you mean by that, and how do you think that has played out historically in the way that Asian societies and their religions or philosophies have looked at the world versus the West?
Well, I would say that Westerners would like things if it has four wheels, you know, it's supposed to be able to drive, you know, and be called a car or truck or whatever else, right? I mean, we expect a certain reaction, a certain role, you know, from people, and many of the things in the East, they expect, you know, they actually expect that people take their time, you know, they rest, you know, that they meditate a lot and so on, and then after that they come out. Then also you can see it, but then you see it often through the things they don't do, you know, they're just there, that they reflect things, and that they're exceedingly powerful. And I would say the people, my wife and I, and all our friends, you know, we had the chance to stay with them. We invited to Europe and partially also to the USA, but there was more other people who did that. But Eurasia, you know, or especially Europe, right, that we took the people there, that you really could feel it, you know, it was a feeling thing, not so much a doing thing. Just sit there, you know, I drive very fast, you know, really fast, autobahn speed, right, 120, 30, 40 miles an hour. So, you know, they just sit there totally cool, you know, oh, that's what we do today, we drive fast, you know, and then we do something else, see what we do after that, or what will we eat afterwards, you know, or whatever else, right? But the thing you see in the East is actually this, that people are cool, you know, they're easy and so on, while we are more inspired, you know, we must do and so on. So there is a character difference there, but it goes very well together. We see their calmness as a sign that they have a total view, and they see our energy as a sign that we are a new culture, a fresh culture, getting into Buddhism and being inspired by whatever we see. Yeah. So this is the thing. There are some differences there, sure there are.
Let me just wrap up this first segment, just asking a little bit about sort of the hierarchy of the Buddhist religion or faith. You know, in the Roman Catholic Church, for example, there's the Pope, and then there are cardinals and archbishops, and then priests that have their own, I guess, I don't know what I'd call them, their own areas, geographic areas. Yeah. Is it the same way in Buddhism? And when you study to become a Buddhist or a Lama, do you have to go through ABC amount of steps? How long does that take? You know, and because I'm sure people have come to you saying that they wanted to follow in your footsteps or in the footsteps of others. What do you recommend for them? So if you could just sort of explain, because we here in the West have a nebulous kind of view.
Well, first see if the hand fits. Put it over your head, you know, see if your ears, 1 ear, 2 ears are caught underneath or whatever else happens, right? I mean, look at the people. Look at the ones who've been doing it for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you know. Look at it and see if it clicks with you. See if they're relaxed or if they're all stiff, you know, if they feel free or if they feel that they're being checked all the time in different ways and so on. And the best thing we have is actually this space, you know, this openness, you know, which means that I trust you and you trust me and so on. And that is what we call Buddha nature, that everybody's mind is essentially clear light, or the space making things possible, and the awareness that can know and understand what's going on. Right? This is what it stands for, and that is what we should really, that's what we should be aware of and focus on, you know. So if it says the hat fits, I like those guys, you know, they're not suppressed, they don't have difficulties if a lady in shorts walks through the room, you know, or whatever else, you know, or whatever, you know, that they just in the middle of their life, and they're working generally with whatever energy is there, and then head off, and join or find out if they're more together.
Okay, well, let me end this segment since we've gotten the introductory stuff out of the way. And in the next segment, I want to ask you some deeper questions that I know a lot of people around the world, whether they're religious or non-religious, just being human beings, would want to hear some answers on. And we'll do that in a moment.
And it's from Buddhist wisdom on the art of dying. A strange person called Lama Ole Nydahl has written it, but don't worry about this kind of strange character, because all the different things standing there are from the Buddha and also from his own, or my own, really important teachers, right? The first incarnate Lama of Tibet, the 16th Karmapa, Ranjung Rigpi Dorje, he was there, he gave teachings to it. Carlo Rinpoche gave so many to it, so many of our teachers really gave these teachings, and I actually taught this thing, which is called Pova, for many years, and we count, like Tomic just reminded me, about 100,000 people, and maybe a bit more, got this sign, so you send the consciousness up through your body, and you go out, and afterwards people are really gone because they feel a strong blessing, and also on top of that, you can see there's a small hole in the top of their head and a bit of blood there. So I've done that to so many people, which is very strengthening. Then being Danish and being an old warrior, I overdid it. I simply overdid it, and I more or less nearly killed myself doing it, one after the other. And in the end, I was sort of a bit, what can you say, warm, used, spent, whatever you want. And, and I've taken it a while after that. My teacher said, take it easy, and now slowly I will begin again, but not with 2,000 people, in one course and stuff like that. I'm not going to do that. It'll be smaller, there will be more preparation around it, and so on. It was really abuse, the other thing.
Yeah.
And I thought it did bump something inside my head I shouldn't have bumped, but it's all right, I still function, right? But this is more or less how it was.
Well, I wanted to ask you generally about the idea of purpose, because I'm actually going to be doing a series of 3 shows on that with someone from science background, theology, and philosophic background. And one of the things that you find in the world is a lot of people seem to have sort of this existential depression, even if they have all of the things, the money or a good life, whatnot. Sometimes people can get depressed because they seem to be lost. Do you believe personally, and also is the Buddhist take on purpose, that everyone has a reason for being? And if so, how does a person find that reason?
Well, people have a cause for being, that the parents met at a certain time and place, and the wife got pregnant, and after that, we didn't have people. But then, when they get into that, then they often don't think very much about it. They fall into the values which are there. If they're Muslims, beat all the others who are not Muslims, who are other kinds of Muslims, and so on. And whatever else you look at, if they're Christian, it's save people, and so on. And if it's Buddhist, share with them, or give meditation. If it's Hindu, then learn to sing beautifully and learn the Bhagavad Gita, or whatever else, right? Whatever you look at, right? People will fall into something or find something, right? So in Buddhism, the thing would be that we are able to help people in their lives, give real advice, that we know from own experience that it works, right? That's really important, not just a package from somewhere, I just open this is salvation, this is this, this is that. But it's like, directly, boom, people say, hey, that's what I was looking for all week, that kind of thing. That's what I would like them to get.
One of the things here in the West that we hear of in the last year or two is something that people call first world problems. And that meaning that there's a tendency in, I guess, the last 50 or so years amongst like the political left in the West to talk about, you should go out and be satisfied with your own life because there are children starving in Africa, or there are earthquakes in South America, and this kind of thing. And I don't know. It seems to me a lot of people who I've met will devote themselves to these causes, but they're really doing it for themselves in a sense. Whereas if someone is having some existential crisis, if someone is going through a romantic breakup, or if someone was unfairly treated, laid off from a job, or fired from a job unfairly, or they're going through some kind of internal manic depression, to me that seems as real a problem, because if you talk about, like you had mentioned the earthquake in Nepal, I remember seeing a documentary a month or so ago. If you get so tied up in all of the bad things that happen on a daily basis, you're just going to feel even worse. Do you think that it's a fair thing that a person can worry first about their own problems, whether it's personal and or professional, before worrying about other things, or does that make them selfish? Because I think that's one of the things that a lot of people here in the West sometimes grapple with.
I actually think that we have a lot of wimps, a lot of softies, a lot of wimps, a lot of people, who are destroying their own fun and freshness and spontaneity and so on in their lives. We have a lot of them, right? And we have them all over the place, and it's the soft left types, the one who walk around with foot-form shoes, and say, well, don't say very much, say all the things they think they're supposed to say and stuff like that. A country like Sweden has gone totally under. I mean, it's over. Sweden is history. What happened, after they got, countless, Muslim immigrants into their countries, they can't even, if a woman is raped on the street, a policeman stands next by, and somebody says, hey, what's this? He looks away and says, I'm not allowed to see that. I'm not allowed to mention that or see that, and so on, right? And I mean, we got wimpish, I mean, a lot of places got soft and weak and so on. And I mean, nobody respects us, if we are like that. I mean, just for the wastebasket, we can, we are completely useless, or we are even destructive to real human values, where somebody will stand up for neighbors, where somebody will take responsibility, where everybody will look at whether people are green or blue or striped or whatever they are, that there are certain values that should be kept, women should be treated well, and people with some courage, and so on. That is the real thing, They live. All the others exist in some corners and read some books about what they're not supposed to think today, or so on. It's a wimpy period, it's really weak, a lot of the things that the people bring. And especially my Viking forefathers, right?
Yeah.
I like them. They look good. They're strong. They're quite healthy biologically, but they completely flatten themselves with these funny thoughts and ideas that they hold on to like that.
Well, you had mentioned just 7 decades ago your parents standing up against the Nazis, and the Danish resistance is, fairly famed for being one of the countries that, even though it's a much smaller country, did resist the Germans just like the Norwegians did. What do you think has accounted for then this wimpishness of the last 7 decades? Is it an overcompensation to sort of make up for, say, European hegemony over the world for the last 500 years, that now we just don't want to stand up and say, no, it's wrong to do A, B, or C. We believe that if you want to join us or our culture, you have to conform to our norms. What do you think has caused that?
Well, I think that people simply got too distracted, and they started putting own problems into the views of the state, the government, into prices, into the values that we have, and so on. I mean, they all got whipped, many got soft and so on, and they all walked around with little signs, saying this or that and so on. And it's all about all the fun things that are not around anymore, all the exciting things, that's what they don't like, right? But all the half asleep, and deeply traumatized, stealing food from your mother when you were a child or whatever like that. I mean, these kinds of people, they're the ones, who are destroying our fun and our everything. It's a pity because the genetic material is good, right? But they just can't use it, They just get into corner, make things difficult for themselves all the time.
You just mentioned fun, and you mentioned that a couple of times. I know people, when they think of religious people in general, but especially Buddhists, they think of monks, and they think of an ascetic lifestyle, sort of, sitting up on a hillside, just, chanting or meditating, as the sun sets. And you also spoke quite movingly of your first wife and when she had died. I wonder, do you think that here in the West, we have a culture that is too focused on the ephemeral, i.e., things like romantic love or sexuality versus deeper, realer love, material things, that, having a fancy car, what they call here in the U.S. keeping up with the Joneses. Do you think that there's something to be something deeper and realer, than what we here in the West have force-fed us?
Well, I would say the car is not so much benefit in America with all the speed limits and stuff that you have. Like Germany, a car is good because you have the autobahn and you hit 230 miles an hour or something like zip going down, and that's excellent, right? That's where a good car is good, right? Here, it's more like driving is going out with a family and looking at this and talking about that and so on. It isn't like super transportation like we're used to it. But except for that, I think that, well, you still, there are very good roads in your country. The redwoods on a motorcycle, I did that half a year ago, and I look forward to doing that again. Redwoods down there, they're very beautiful, very, very amazing, very, very nice. And also many other places, in Europe also, Massif Central in France. It is incredible. If you can hold the steering, then in your hands, then you will think that you are reborn every 10 miles, right? With the right curve and the right everything, and you move through it. It's beautiful, right?
Let me ask about happiness, since you just talked about joy. I know in the West, too, just to keep on that theme, there's often a sense of that happiness is one of life's greatest pursuits. It's in the U.S. Constitution that the pursuit of happiness is supposedly guaranteed by the United States Constitution. And I'm just wondering, do you think that happiness in and of itself is something to be attained, or is that just sort of a byproduct of doing something deeper, having a goal in life, to maybe sacrifice for others, to maybe be a great artist and do something that helps enlighten others? Do you think that in the West we see happiness as an end goal, whereas it should be something that's seen as, if it's a byproduct and it comes along in the service to something higher, that's a good thing? Do you think our priorities are somehow askew?
I think there is some Puritan spirit, somewhere that happiness for happiness' sake, is not enough, right? And I think that's also all right. I think that is, you think that, you are happy yourself, your neighbors will also smile and so on, but down the row of houses, it gets lost, right? Mm. While on the other hand, if you do something that is very positive and at the same time you get happy, right? Then you have a living example, you have everything else, and you move on from that. So I think it should go more out, be broader, be wider like that. This is what I would like to see. And we have so many people doing really good things, so many good people. They should just learn to enjoy it. They should just learn to think that, hey, if I'm doing this, maybe somebody will do that to me tomorrow, or maybe they won't, doesn't matter, This is a fulfilling situation. People have benefit, and that's it, right? This is what I would like to see. This is what we have, and that's the altruistic thing, which I think is a wonderful thing to have. You have a lot of that in America also because you don't have all the social laws that we have in Northern Europe, right? Northern Europe, everybody's taken care of. You have to hide, to get away from the do-gooders who want to come and give you an extra pension or something else like that. by the way. So they come from everywhere, to benefit you, right? And so on. And okay, if you want to be a messy type, then they'll come and douse you. They'll do everything, right? So, so that's one thing. Then we have, and I like it, I also like to see people looking healthy and so on. But it's good, some more freedom and so on would also be nice.
What would be a good example of in your own career or people or that you have associated with that have done one of these things that you mentioned as doing good and that has spread outwards to help, whether in happiness or other aspects of human existence?
I would say 700 centers around the world, in all the different places, non-Islam and non-communist, right? Or communist, if we could do that, but Islam is too humorless. Some of our best thing actually came from Poland. Mm-hmm. They came in, they were just waiting to jump up, and take the whole thing. And with the police, everything after them, we moved together through all kinds of places, and I gave lectures, and my wife, lovely Hannah, was along also and taught, and all these different things we did. This was very useful. This was very, very good. But otherwise, if it's humorless and it's just trying to be holy, and it's mainly concentrated on what you shouldn't do and stuff like that, then I can't use that. And our nations also can't use that.
When we speak of self-sacrifice and doing things for others, whether it's actually going out and building a home or volunteering at a hospital, or even someone who may be doing something in the arts or the sciences that you're not going to get any immediate reward from. It may come late in your life or after your life, that the fruits that you have planted in your lifetime come to bear for other people. I know here in the West that a lot of people do feel that there's a downside. I know I've been involved in the arts for 30 years plus, and I know a lot of people get down about that, what I said, that they don't see the fruits of their labor immediately rewarded or even just recognized, if not rewarded. Do you often encounter that with people who come to the Diamond Way or come ask you personally that you might encounter? And what is your advice to those people?
I just say do it because it's right, and then be good when the bill, or what's it called, the check. It's called check, isn't it? Yeah. When the bill or the check is lying in your mailbox the next day or a year later or whatever. Just doing good by itself. And the best thing to do good is actually to make people grow up, to make them trust themselves, to really get them into situations where they will try to be a mirror to others and say, listen, you are much more beautiful than you thought you were. You have qualities you didn't even dream that you might have, and so on. Try them out, right? Try them out. See what you can do, Shine on the world, as well as you can. This is what I would do. This is really where I would put my power.
Yeah. Earlier, I had asked you about when people have come to maybe convert to Buddhism or maybe to study to be a Lama, and you seem to mention, I forget the exact phrase you used, but you seem to mention that some people just aren't cut out for it. Do you often get people who turn to you for some guidance or some help or some wisdom that you can only give so much help to, and what do you do with those people that are looking for something that you cannot provide?
Well, I would try with Hinduism because they also have quite a few good things. Taoism would also be things there. There'd be many, things with a full container, which can really take you and benefit you in many ways. And if that doesn't work, then maybe because the offer isn't there, that they cannot just go and say, hey, hello, I'm this or that. My Lama said, I'm a Taoist, I should learn from you, because there are many things, where you can't find it and so on. Then in that case, you try to help them to do good things, to feel good about what they're doing, and so on. And then you start from a very wide possibility, and then gradually you go into what is central, and so on. What a certain religion can bring. And there are people, they are simply Taoists, you know, they have been Hindus in their last life. I mean, you can see it, you can feel it, right? And then leading them back to where they came from, that's a gift. That's a joy. That makes me really glad.
You mentioned some other religions, both Western and Eastern. Let me just ask you: do you find that Buddhism or the Buddhist outlook is consonant with any of the other major religions, like you said, mentioned Taoism? Because you seem, from what you've said, you seem to not have a high opinion of Islam. Do you
I
find?
have a very low opinion of Islam, I can tell you that.
Okay. Well,
I read newspapers. I hear what they do every day. I hear about the women, they took out the clitoris. You know, I hear about all the different things they do every day because Europe is a place where these things come together. I don't like them. Quite honestly, I don't like them.
Well, do you think? Well, do you think that it's a misapplication? Because most people would argue that Islam is misapplied by some of these people.
It's not. I have all the books here. You know, all the books, the direct quotes. You know, by a very fine professor from this actually, you know, from Texas. Believe it or not, you know, very fine. So Bill Warner is his name. He has done a lot of translations of different Buddhist texts. And the worse they are, the worse they are to read, the more Muslim they are, actually, following the thing. I don't like that religion.
Well, as I said,
for Trump, it might be a good vote for Trump.
Yeah. Well, what of the other religions do you find the most consonant, the most, I mean, does the Diamond Way centers, you mentioned almost 700 of them, do you work in concert with other, like, Catholic charities, the Red Cross, anything like that? What other religious organizations have you found the most success in working with?
Well, I would say the most interesting thing we have, the most interesting and important thing we have is actually our methods. I mean, all the others are very good with social things, with organization, with everything. We can deliver the methods, the kind of meditations which will change you very quickly and so on, and make a minus life into a positive, or at least a neutral life, like that. We really have the methods is the strength. Buddha taught us that, yeah.
So would you say then that the strength of Buddhism is that it focuses on the individual more so than the social? Because you just mentioned that the other religions and organizations are better or good at social aspects.
And mind, yes, we have the message for using, and that I think should be the thing that we work on. Because this is what we can do. We have a complete science of the way the mind works and things you can do. I mean, I told about the poor, that people, you know, who come in and are thinking I'm going to die one day and so on, and they sit down with a few hundred or several hundred people with the same view, and then after meditation, suddenly there's some blood on the fingers, on the top of the head, you know, and they come to me and I say, yeah, you got the sign, congratulations. The rest of your life is a gift now, and I'll use it for the benefit of others, right? So this is how we work. This is how it is. This is our job, right? We have the methods, and that's why, because we have that, we don't need so much with social things. We don't need so much with other things. If people don't have money, we take from our own pocket instead of making a complicated system for deciding why they should or should not have food and health and stuff like that. It's human. It's you know, it's us to others, you know, and them to us.
As time goes on, do you think that the major religions, including Buddhism, that because a lot of religions always believe that their way is the lone way, that the Pope is infallible, as we mentioned, the Quran, Muslims believe that the Quran is the Word of God, Christians believe the Bible is the Word of God. Do you think that Buddhism is more accommodating to disparate views than some of these other religions? Because as far as I know, Buddhism doesn't. I mean, you certainly want people to convert, but
that's true.
Do you think that that's a tenet that will eventually make Buddhism last longer than some of the other religions?
I don't know. I don't think people get better. We'll probably have them all for a long time, like this or like that. But the special thing about Buddhism is it takes you the whole way. It really takes you the whole way. It's not a faith religion. It's a religion of experience. You work with the methods, you get the different signs and so on, and you know, okay, then next step. What do I do now? Or shall I use this thing I developed in order to benefit others, which some very good people do. Shall I work on the level of causality, what to do or not to do? Shall I work on the level of motivation, compassion, and wisdom and keep it well balanced as well as I can, not sentimental, not stiff? Or shall I work on the level of bliss, that mind in itself is highest bliss, and then try to spread that power and that quality to others? These are the three possibilities, and together it's best.
Yeah, you just made, I think, an important point that a lot of people, I guess, don't get perhaps about Buddhism, and I'd like you to expound on it. You said that Buddhism is really not about faith, but about experience. Could you explain that? Do you mean that, for example, if I'm a Jew or a Christian or any other religion, that I would believe that I have to give myself to a higher power, like Alcoholics Anonymous here in the West, that they believe, that's how you defeat alcoholism. How would say the Buddhist attempt for someone to deal if they were addicted to alcohol or something different as an experience versus faith?
I think that people, if they can do it, if they understand that the house doesn't get happy, the car doesn't get happy, the job doesn't get happy, the only thing that gets happy is our mind, right? And they find out that we have the methods to access that mind, to get in there and touch it, right? Then they will say, let's look at that a bit. And then they will see what kind of Buddhism fits, the monks in East Asia, with yellow robe, they're mainly Theravada or Hinayana, it's called, they're focusing on what's good to avoid. This may be somebody's hat, right? Then there's some people who want a bigger hat, that's when you move more west, and so on. You get into the Mahayana countries, where you understand I'm one, the others are countless, so it's more important to do something for them, right? And also you understand that everything is a dream, all things come together, change, and disappear again. And then you go to the Diamond Way or the Tibetan Buddhism areas, and here there are different kinds. There's a very old school called Nyingma-Pas who do very well. We also do very well. Then we have the Sakya-Pas. These are the three old schools that mainly focus on meditation. And then we have the Lama school, the Mahayana, or what's it up there, and also the Gelupa, right? The ones who are the virtuous ones, right? That's actually what it means. It's always a little dangerous when people say how virtuous they are, right? It's not so easy to work with sometimes. But anyway, because it gets complicated. Well, in that case, then this is some spiritual, some discussions, clear thinking and stuff like that, and so on. And then also, of course, meditation, but I think more calming and holding meditation, while we like the meditation, you build up these fantastic forms of energy and light. You use mantras like Om, Pen, Free, Soha, whatever works, and then you dissolve them in light, mix them into yourself, and you're there. It's excellent. It's a really good feeling to be those guys. Really, really, really good feeling.
Well, let me ask you about the concept that most people probably associate with Buddhism or Eastern thought in general, and that's the idea of karma. That good, that good people will somehow get some kind of reward for being good. That bad people who commit bad actions, a murderer, a rapist, or whatever, will get something due to them. But in day-to-day life, we don't really see that often. We often see where criminals might get away with something, and they'll be lauded for it sometimes in popular culture, especially here in the West. And people who are good sometimes suffer needlessly. You spoke about your wife having died, and you spoke about some other people who had died prematurely. What do you say to people who would say that there can be no karma? There's no evidence of karma, fairness, whatever you want to call it, in the cosmos?
There is lots of proof. If you understand that you cannot harvest the day you plant the seeds, right? And if you look at the mental states of people, even before the action, that they made comes back to them, you will see they're not sitting very well. They're like moving in their chair all the time. They look here and there. Car stops outside. They look through the window. I mean, all kinds of things. The things we do, if positive or negative, are following us the whole time. And you may say, oh, he just did a lot of bad things, and now he's very rich and famous, and so on. Yes, on the outside, right? On the inside, you would not want to have him inside you, right? You would not like to share and experience his state of mind. He's scared and everything. It takes time to know karma, because sometimes it's like an elephant being born. It takes 80 years, and you begin to say, oh, there's an elephant, right? Or another time, it's really, that's, some things can happen a lot more quickly like that. But really, it all comes back, and we carry it on our shoulders. And that makes meditation so important. And here we have a chance where we can really dissolve negativity, where we can really take away the things we did, where we can ask, whoever we harmed or, whatever, that say, I'm sorry, I didn't plan to do that, I had a weak moment, I talked too much or whatever, and then trying to work that out of one system, and then using that experience to help others afterwards to also avoid weak situations and things like that.
Well, when you speak, I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean. Well, when you speak of karma, though, does that always mean within one's lifetime? Because probably the other thing that people talk.
When you die, right?
I'm sorry?
The place where karma really comes out is when we die.
Yeah.
Right now, mind is occupied by so many sensory impressions, things to do, look here, look there, touch, feel, and everything like that, and so on. When we die, that finishes. Then the images which have been stocked in our minds, they come out by themselves. And at that time, we have very little chance to do anything, unless we were smart enough to forgive ourselves, or us to be forgiven or understand, the negativities that we did, as a mistake and something we would never do again, right? If we work like that, then we can get rid of it. But otherwise, if you do something, some negative, the worst judge you ever had will be your own mind. If those impressions come up, you will not feel good.
Yeah.
I always advise people, if you're dying, whatever happens, we have a Buddha form called Dorje Senpai in Tibetan, or Dasha Sattva in Sanskrit, where we meditate on a light energy Buddha over us, a white, transparent form, and inside there something happening, and a nectar is streamed down through our body and pushing everything negative out of our body the whole way. Underneath us, the earth opens up, and just have this feeling it is now leaving us and getting lighter all the time. It's painful to see it again, but I got rid of that, and now I understand that, and so on, right? This is stuff we can do now. This is why we meditate, in order to free ourselves of our mistakes and developing a surplus so we can do something for others.
Let me just ask, just so I can clarify, because other than karma, I think reincarnation is the other thing that people associate with Buddhism in the East. And so the thing that those two concepts, reincarnation and karma, seem to be tied. Let me just ask you, since you grew up in an occupied country, or you were born and in your early years were occupied by the Nazis, would it be your belief then that, say, if you were someone like, just to use a famous name, of Joseph Mengele, or after the war, if you were in the Red Army, if you were Joseph Stalin, these are people, as far as I know, I mean, they may have been caught, they may have been put on trial, but someone like a Joseph Stalin, as bad as his interior mind may have been, he killed maybe more people than Hitler, and yet he basically died in full power. Is it your belief then that if he didn't get the justice due him in this life, that if he was reincarnated, he would get justice in another life. Even let's say if that future version of Stalin was, say, a pious person and lived a life, would that be fair, for example? Even.
I'll tell you one thing. The moment what is distracting us now from all kinds of pleasant and unpleasant inner and outer experiences is the constant stream of sensory impressions coming to us. If you do things like what Stalin did, what Hitler did, what a lot of other people, and what people do, mullahs do, and all kinds of people do, if you really, if you look at that, right, and that comes up after you're dead, then, or in the process of dying, then you don't have this ability to eat a few something from the medicine box and something like that, to distract yourselves or anything like that. At that time, you get the full trip through, and that can be a very long time, and it can be a very long time with lots of pain, until one appears as a toad somewhere and gets back into another cycle of existence and so on. I tell you, this mind does not forget. The impressions in our mind do not go away. We have to, what does Bob Dylan say? You have to pay to get out of here. Going through all these things twice, right? And the second time is consciously.
So you would then say that if you met someone who, for example, is having some existential crises or maybe feeling badly about themselves, would you think that might be some remnant left over from a prior existence where they did ill?
If it's not this life, then it'll be a former life. There is causality. You will not have the result without the cause, right? So the moment you remove the cause, the result also disappears and so on. But otherwise, you carry it on your more or less broad shoulders afterwards.
Okay, I just have two more major questions that I'd like to ask, and then we can wrap up the interview. Humanity, in your lifetime, for example, you were a young man when we finally landed on the moon. You were probably less than 30 years.
When you landed on the moon, I was actually in Moscow right at that time.
Oh, okay. But we've seen just in your lifetime, we've gone to the moon. We've sent spacecraft out past the farthest planet, Pluto. We've come up with medicines that can cure all kinds of ills that when you were a boy or just before that were killing millions of people. We can control things. We can feed more people than we ever before. There have been so many wonderful inventions that have improved life. Yes, we've done things like add greenhouse gases and we're melting the ice caps, and there are negatives. But it seems to me that if one were to compare, say, 2016 versus the year you were born, 1941, life on the whole seems to be a lot better. There are still wars, there are still diseases and suffering and whatnot. What do you see, say, for the rest of this century and onward as what's going to happen in the world, and where is Buddhism's place within that coming future? Do you think it's a bright future?
I think that what's happening is quantity and quality is a juggernaut or whatever you say. That's where it happens. Quantity or quality. I think we don't need more quantity. We have countless people who do not get the chance for developing their human capacities and who also don't even think of doing it, right? Haven't reached the level where they even think of doing it. So I'd say quality before quantity. I'd say we should try to help the poor countries, especially Africa, which is a bleeding tragedy, right? All over from north to south and everywhere, right? And Islam. Take them, pay them money to have less children. It's the only thing we can do. We'll have to dry out the places where the pain happens, where the disturbing feelings come up, where people are not really getting educations or understanding what is offered them and stuff like that. And so on. We have to put in there and reward them for having less children. So the world can be more rich again, more free, more open, and all the different qualities and so on can develop and move and so on. We are making human beings into junk. We are pulling them out, they're born in all kinds of places where they'll never learn to read, they'll never learn to write, they will never have any freedom, they will be at the mercy of all kinds of diseases, and so on, right? And, we have to have less children in the poor countries. Simply, we have to pay them to have less children and stop paying them if they keep having too many.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, let me
That's
just.
the only chance. That's the only chance I see of saving this world, of saving the best things we have, is diminish the birth rates in the poor countries.
Let me just follow up on that, though. As humanity, eventually we will expand out. Do you think Buddhism versus other religions is the viewpoint that's most able to say accommodate? For example, if mankind met other sentient creatures, do you think it's because Buddhism seems to be less provincial that, let's say, if we met a race of spacefaring beings in 100 years or something as we go out there, that it would be somehow uh, easier for the Buddhist idea of the cosmos to deal with that? Because a lot of times you hear in the West that, oh, if we found life in outer space somewhere, that it would destroy the foundations of Western society. Do you think Buddhism is more able to accommodate that view of the cosmos, that humanity is just one little drop in a great ocean, say, of life?
Everything is mind, and everything is mind's free play, right? I mean, the experiencer is mind, and the things we experience is a product of our mind, right? So everything appears from space, plays around in space, is known by space, and brings results back into space again, new seeds for new things. That's how things move all the time. This is the wave of samsara, the conditioned world, and so on. And what we like to do is to make a nirvana out of the samsara, that the people who reach a certain level can really go to a place where they are beyond all the limitations people usually experience, from where they can really have a good influence on others and do things for them and so on. But this is what I think, this is what we should look for. But we should back away from seeing people as mass. We should also see them as individuals, and we should look at which races, which cultures, which populations, which schools of thought and so on will bring the kind of people who will enjoy being here, who will have a good life here, who will really want to benefit others also, and so on. And then we just need to read a newspaper and say who's doing what where, and that's all.
In the final segment of the interview, I just want to give you a few minutes to sort of wrap up any final thoughts, but I want to end this segment with one final question, and it's on the book that you wrote called Fearless Death, Buddhist Wisdom on the Art of Dying. And it looks like you wrote it a few years after your first wife had died. And of course, death is the thing that most human beings fear. We're one of the few animals that know, so you can be 10, 15, 20 years old and you know that you're going to die someday, whereas most animals don't have that cognitive awareness. What was the basic, did that book come out of your wife's death? What is its basic premise, and what are your thoughts on death for the individual and how people can get over that fear?
I actually gave power conscious dying. I checked 100,000 people, where I knocked a hole in their heads without even touching their heads, just by teaching to send up the mind to a red Buddha called limitless light, who is sitting over them and then going up like that. So, I've seen all that. It's what happens. My students are still doing it. I'll probably start doing it also again, but not to 4,000 people at the same time, because it's a bit much, even for my solid Danish head, it's a bit much. But we go a little bit down, to the hundreds instead, and then, again, I think we can help some people there. So this is a good thing. If you have experienced that, the fear of death is over.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let me end this segment. In the final segment, I'll just ask you to just sort of wrap up any views, and I'll do that in a moment. I've been speaking with Lama Ole Nydahl about his life, his career, his views on many things. And so if I could just ask you to take a couple of minutes to just sum up, if someone were to come upon this interview that has no idea about who you are or the things, your ideas, what kind of advice would you give to your average person about living life to their fullest?
Myself?
Your personally, or your belief system.
Understand the others want happiness just as much as you do. So try to see how you can benefit them.
And just to wrap up, what is in the near future for you in the next years? If there's one thing in the rest of your life that you would like to accomplish, what would that be?
Well, more people who get interested in the nature of their mind, who look inside instead of just looking outside, and who develop the quality to benefit others. As certain powerful strengths in the middle of our lives, from where we can breathe out and touch others and pull them in and should give them trust in their own nature.
Okay. Well, I've been speaking with Lama Ole Nydahl. His website is lama-ole-nydahl.org. Anyone who has enjoyed or found it interesting, the things he said, can go there. I'll have a link below this video. So I just want to thank you for your time and your thoughts, Lama Ole.
Thank you, my friend. I hope we can meet sometime.
Okay. I'd like that.